The entire hangar went eerily silent as Captain Ava Brooks walked in, the flight helmet securely tucked under her arm. It was as if the very air in the room had thickened. The moment her boots clicked on the concrete, every pair of eyes in the vicinity turned toward her. The colonel, a towering figure with years of experience behind him, looked her up and down with an almost bemused smirk. His voice echoed across the room, carrying a mixture of condescension and disbelief. "You really think this is Top Gun?" he scoffed, loud enough for the entire crew to hear. "Before we go further, let me ask you something from the heart. Are you ready to help us honor those unsung heroes who've sacrificed so much in silence? If you believe stories like these, raw and powerful, deserve to be shared, hit that subscribe button and help keep them alive." What's unfolding here isn't just a story, it's a reminder of the quiet legends among us, waiting to be noticed. Ava didn't flinch. Not even a twitch. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she simply walked past him, as though he were nothing more than a distant echo of a thought, climbed into the F-16 that had been waiting for her, and started the engine. The deafening roar of the jet's turbines filled the hangar as she taxied into position, leaving behind a stunned silence. Less than 30 minutes into the flight, everything was chaos. Their once tight formation was in disarray. One jet was lost, a pilot was unconscious, and radios crackled with unintelligible static. The sky, which had been a perfect backdrop moments before, was now filled with disarray and confusion. The only one still in control of the situation was the very person they'd all mocked. What she did next would not only save the mission, but it would also leave the entire base speechless and ruin the colonel's career for good. Ava Brooks had never sought the limelight. She was the type of person who preferred the quiet hum of an engine over the attention of a crowd. In fact, her entire military career had been one long, uphill battle against the invisible noise that never made it onto the official flight logs, the whispered comments in briefing rooms, the snide remarks behind her back, the subtle smirks when her name appeared on the roster. She learned early on that while the uniform was the same for everyone, what it covered wasn't always treated equally. At 35, with more than 1,000 flight hours logged, 3 overseas deployments, and 2 commendations for making split-second decisions in life-or-death airspace emergencies, she had earned every inch of her rank. But still, she found herself sitting on folding chairs outside flight control, waiting, watching, as if she were invisible. And you know what? It makes you wonder, how many others like Ava are out there? Hidden in plain sight, working tirelessly without recognition, doing their jobs quietly but effectively. How many untold stories are there of people like her, who go above and beyond every single day but never get the applause they deserve? If this is the kind of story that resonates with you, then don't just read, subscribe, share, and spread the word. These are the stories of true heroes, the unsung legends who are waiting to be recognized. Callahan Joint Air Training Center, where Ava had been reassigned, was a place where only the best survived. Known for its high-pressure training cycles and its razor-sharp chain of command, the base was a proving ground for pilots who needed to sharpen their skills before being deployed or promoted. Ava's reassignment there was abrupt, a simple memo instructing her to report without any explanation. It was as if they had cast her into a place where her experience didn't matter, and she was simply expected to blend into the background. Her first week at Callahan was a blur of silence. No warm welcome, no camaraderie, just a locker, a bunk, and a memo that read, "Captain Brooks, stand by. Observe a rotation." That was the polite way of saying, "You're here, but you're not important enough to actually fly." She was left to watch and wait, observing others during the briefings, quietly taking notes, but never called upon. To the others, she was just another pilot, waiting her turn, not worthy of attention. But Ava didn't mind the silence. She had learned long ago how to exist in the background, unnoticed but always present. Every day, she passed by the hangars where the jets were housed, her footsteps slow as she gazed at the F-16s. She had flown one only 3 times in combat, but her time in the simulator had given her a deep understanding of the machine. She could feel its power, its weight, and the responsibility that came with controlling it. At Callahan, the F-16 was the aircraft everyone trained on, the machine that meant something. And unless you had the privilege of being scheduled for a mission, you were nothing. It didn't escape her notice how the younger pilots, those fresh out of flight school or on their first operational assignments, barely acknowledged her presence. Even the instructors didn't seem sure what to make of her. She was there, but not really there. To them, she was a ghost, just another face in the crowd of aviation hopefuls, someone who didn't quite belong. And then there was Lieutenant Crowley, the quintessential hotshot, perfectly gelled hair, a flawless record, and a personality that could fill an entire room. Every time he opened his mouth, it was to stake his claim on the airspace, as though he believed the sky was his alone. Crowley was the kind of guy who made sure to speak louder when Ava was around, as if he were trying to drown out her existence. Above all of them was Colonel Branson, the base's training commander. With a square jaw, a chest full of spotless medals, and a demeanor that demanded respect, he was the embodiment of military precision. He never spoke to Ava directly. When he saw her, it was more of a passing acknowledgement, like he was nodding at a technician or a clipboard, not a fellow pilot. Then came the morning of the VIP exercise, when everything would change. A congressional delegation was scheduled to visit the base, along with several generals from the Joint Staff. The event was more about show than substance, a demonstration of air coordination, formation discipline, and emergency response. To Colonel Branson, it was an opportunity to put on a flawless display of his team's skill. He had his 3 stars lined up, Crowley, Lieutenant Ramirez, and Major Hicks. Ava, of course, had been assigned to the observation deck. It was the usual routine: sit back, stay quiet, and be ready in case someone else couldn't make it. She had learned not to question the system, even when it felt like she was being sidelined. But then, just an hour before takeoff, Major Hicks twisted his ankle in the stairwell. Nothing too dramatic, just the sort of bad luck that could ground him from the mission. Colonel Branson, furious, paced like a caged animal. He needed a third pilot to maintain the formation, and with 2 others already out for equipment checks, Ava was the only one left. She appeared in the hangar, suited up, boots strapped, helmet under her arm. It took Branson a moment to register what he was seeing, and when he finally did, he barked the words that would echo in the minds of everyone present: "You really think this is Top Gun?" The words rang out like an insult, but Ava didn't flinch. She didn't even react. She walked past him, climbed into the jet, and began the pre-flight checklist. The mechanic froze. The tech stopped moving. Crowley, leaning against his ladder, chuckled, but Ava didn't respond. She was already focused on the task at hand, the hum of the F-16 systems filling her ears as she began the countdown. The turbines roared to life, and suddenly, Ava Brooks was airborne, flanked by Crowley on her right and Ramirez behind, climbing into the clear blue sky above Callahan. As they soared, the skies were unusually calm, no turbulence, no thermal pockets to contend with. For a moment, it felt like the perfect day to demonstrate their skills. But Ava knew better than to trust the calm. She had been flying long enough to understand that the calm never lasted. At 14,000 feet, the formation began to spread out into its planned delta configuration. Ava, always precise, stayed perfectly in position, her nose aligned, her distance tight. Crowley led the group with confidence, barking orders over the comms as if he were invincible. Ramirez flew in the rear, keeping an eye on their 6. And Ava? She stayed steady, close enough to catch the shadow of Crowley's jet on her fuselage. From the VIP tower, the generals observed, and Branson spoke proudly into the mic, giving commentary about the flight. He was quick to name Crowley as the best, Ramirez as rock solid, and then, with an almost dismissive tone, mentioned Ava as the substitute pilot on the left wing. He barely remembered her name, let alone her record. To him, she was a footnote. But Ava didn't need his validation. As the planes performed their maneuvers, she stayed sharp, always alert, always calculating. It wasn't until they entered the first maneuver, a gentle spiral at 18,000 feet, that things started to go wrong. Crowley led the way with a clean roll, but as Ramirez followed, something shifted in the air. Ava's instincts kicked in. She adjusted her angle perfectly, the planes carving a beautiful helix into the sky. From the tower, the generals nodded in approval. And then, Ava heard it, a strange tone in her headset, an unscheduled signal cutting through. She glanced at her HUD. Everything looked fine, but something wasn't right. Her radar pinged a new blip, too close, too fast. Then, in an instant, a white flash sliced through the sky. A civilian-grade drone, spiraling uncontrollably, crossed their path. Crowley tried to avoid it, but it was too late. The drone clipped his underside and exploded in a violent burst of shrapnel. His F-16 jolted, spiraling out of control, smoke trailing behind it. The radio erupted with warnings, and Branson's voice, once so full of arrogance, was now a crackling mess of panic. Abort the run. Get them out of there. Ava didn't hesitate. Instinct took over. She broke formation immediately and dove toward Crowley's jet. He was losing altitude fast, and his voice crackled over the comms, filled with panic. I can't stabilize. Hydraulics are gone. But Ava didn't flinch. She didn't second-guess herself. She dropped speed and slid her jet beneath his, matching his descent angle perfectly. Let go of the throttle, she ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos. And then, in that moment of pure focus, she guided him down, inch by inch, through the smoke and the chaos. The generals watched in stunned silence as the substitute pilot, the one no one had wanted, became the only one who could save the day. At 8,000 feet, everything changed in an instant. Crowley's left wing snapped with a sickening crack, and his jet veered violently to one side, tilting sharply. Without a second of hesitation, Ava reacted. The control stick was in her hands, guiding her movements as she flared, rolled left, and cut the power, all while her mind raced. The jet's descent was inevitable, but she wasn't about to let it fall apart. Her eyes never left Crowley's aircraft as she reignited the engine, flying under the falling debris in a split-second decision that would determine everything. Her stabilizer brushed against the edge of Crowley's airframe, the metallic jolt reverberating through the air like the scream of a wounded beast. She didn't flinch. Not once. There was no room for fear, no time for hesitation. The only thing that mattered was bringing them both down safely. For 2 agonizing seconds, the jet steadied, just enough for Crowley to regain a flicker of consciousness. His voice crackled through the radio, strained and broken, his words raw, Brooks, keep your hands off the stick. Ava's grip tightened, her mind sharp and unyielding. There was no time to argue, no room for ego. She didn't need to be told what to do. She could feel the plane's descent, the trembling air beneath them. She guided them down like that, inch by inch, bleeding altitude, managing 2 aircraft paths at once, every shift of wind, every wobble in balance anticipated with the precision of a seasoned pilot. When they hit 3,000 feet, the moment of truth arrived. She broke formation, shifting her jet into a steep vector toward the emergency strip. Crowley's aircraft fell into its descent path, an unsteady, stunned animal now in the hands of fate. Fire crews were already on the move, sirens screaming in the distance, but Ava didn't land. Not yet. She kept her eyes locked on Crowley's jet, watching as it hit the tarmac, bouncing twice before skidding to a halt, surrounded by foam and fire trucks. He was alive. Only then did she bring her own jet down, still flawless, no scratches, no damage. The engines hummed their final note, a faint echo that carried across the tarmac. Inside the emergency command room, however, there was a silence so thick it could have been cut with a knife. The kind of silence that hangs in the air after a miracle no one can explain. As Ava stepped off the tarmac and into the debriefing corridor, sweat soaking through her flight suit, her helmet tucked under one arm, the room fell into an eerie stillness. Heads turned, eyes widened, but no one said a word. It wasn't admiration, not yet anyway. It was disbelief. It was the kind of stunned quiet that follows something extraordinary, something impossible, something no one was ready for. The medics were still tending to Crowley, who was conscious but dazed, his eyes unfocused, clearly shaken. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. The fire crews had extinguished the engine blaze before it could reach the fuel tanks. Just a few more minutes, and the story would have been a very different one. Crowley would never speak of that day the same way again. Not with the same pride, not with the same arrogance. But at least he would speak, because Ava had given him a second chance, a second life. Inside the briefing hall, the generals had returned to their seats, their faces pale, their conversation hushed. The room was still tense, the weight of what had just unfolded hanging over them. Their eyes were glued to the high-resolution replay on the screen, footage from one of the drones that had captured every harrowing moment of the descent. General Wilcox, the commander of Air Mobility Operations, stood with his arms crossed, staring at the loop for the third time. He hadn't spoken since the incident. Colonel Branson stood off to the side, his hands clenched behind his back, his jaw tight. His face, usually flushed with pride and control, was now flushed with something else, something darker. He had spent years building a reputation, a foundation of authority and hierarchy, only to see it crumble in the space of 27 minutes. Not because of enemy fire. Not because of a system failure. But because the pilot he had openly mocked, the one he had dismissed, had just saved his base from national embarrassment, and, more importantly, saved his best pilot from becoming a smoldering heap of debris in the desert. And she had done it without waiting for permission. Ava stood near the back of the room, still in her flight suit, the calmest presence in the chaos. Her expression was unreadable, but beneath that calm exterior, she was everything they weren't. Focused. Unshakable. The same calm she had shown in the skies, in the moment when everyone else had frozen. General Wilcox finally turned from the screen, his voice sharp as he spoke. "Which one of you assigned her to stand by?" His words cut through the silence like a blade. No one answered. Branson shifted slightly, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "Captain Brooks was recently transferred," Branson said, his voice stiff, almost defensive. "I didn't have full flight evaluations on her when I drafted the rotation." Wilcox's eyes narrowed. "Yet she's logged over 1,000 hours, flew 3 emergency extractions in Kandahar, and landed a bird in a sandstorm with a locked rudder. You had all that on her record. Why was she grounded?" Branson hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight. "I made a judgment call based on available resources." Wilcox didn't flinch. His gaze locked onto Branson. "That judgment nearly cost you 2 pilots, a jet, and an entire PR disaster during a congressional tour." He turned to Ava, his tone softening but no less direct. "And she corrected it." Ava stood perfectly still, her eyes unwavering. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words could. The room was silent for a moment, 10 seconds that stretched on like an eternity. Every pair of eyes shifted from Wilcox to Ava, and then back to Wilcox again. The replay flickered once more on the screen, the final maneuver, Ava's F-16 sliding under Crowley's spiraling jet, guiding it with unerring precision through smoke and fire. The generals watched, mesmerized by the skill, the instinct, the raw ability. Wilcox pointed toward the screen. "That maneuver," he said, his voice growing more focused, "the final vector alignment, that wasn't textbook. That wasn't simulation-level coordination. That was muscle memory. That was instinct. You don't get that from standby. You get that from war." He stepped toward her, his expression serious now. "Captain, who taught you that?" Ava's voice was steady, unwavering. "My father, sir. He flew with the 3003rd Tactical Fighter Squadron in Iraq. He taught me never to wait for orders if I could see what needed to be done." Another general leaned in. "What's his name?" Ava didn't hesitate. Colonel Adrian Brooks, sir. There was a long pause. Even Branson, who had been standing quietly, stiffened at the name. Adrian Brooks. A decorated Air Force combat pilot. Posthumously honored with a Distinguished Flying Cross. His name was still spoken with reverence in textbooks and memorials. And now, that name lived on through the hand of his daughter. No one in the room had known. Because no one had bothered to ask. Wilcox nodded slowly, his gaze shifting back to the room. I want this report filed. I want her name in the post-flight commendations, and I want to know why she wasn't already cleared for lead missions. Then, his eyes locked onto Branson. You're going to answer that in writing. Branson's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Ava stood motionless, her expression still unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just waited. Because the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had worked her entire life for, had arrived. And she had earned every second of it. When the generals left one by one, Branson was the last to remain. He walked slowly toward her, his expression unreadable. The confidence, the arrogance that had defined him since her first day on base, had all but evaporated. What remained was something heavier. Something that couldn't be brushed off. He stopped a few feet from her, glanced at the ground, and then met her eyes. You saved his life, he said quietly, his voice devoid of its usual bravado. Ava nodded once. Yes, sir. Branson looked down again, his gaze lingering on the floor for what felt like a long time. When he finally spoke, it was in a voice softer than anyone had ever heard from him. Dismissed, Captain. She turned, walking away without a word, leaving him standing in the silence that he had created for himself. The base didn't change overnight, but something in the air shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't official. There were no speeches, no medals, no lines of brass standing at attention. But the silence that had once followed Ava Brooks, the vacuum of recognition that came from neglect, had turned into something else. Respect. Unspoken but unmistakable. Ava was no longer the substitute, the observer, the backup. No one said it out loud, but they all knew. Every time she walked through the hangar, the techs made way for her, no questions asked. The younger pilots watched her closely, observing her every move with the kind of attention usually reserved for instructors. They'd never asked real questions before. Now, they did, not to challenge her, but to learn from her. Crowley didn't return to the air for 3 weeks. When he did, he didn't speak of that day to anyone. Not because he was ashamed. But because words couldn't capture what had happened. He carried the memory differently now. He trained harder. He spoke less. And when he looked at Ava, it was with a quiet, wordless gratitude. The new rotation schedule came in on a Friday. Ava's name was at the top, lead pilot. No asterisks. No conditions. Her briefing packet included advanced sim time, a squadron of her own, and full flight authority on all airframes stationed at Callahan. No one challenged it. No one even questioned it. Branson didn't sign the orders. It came from higher. In the weeks that followed, nothing about her routine changed. She still arrived early. She still calibrated her own equipment. She still stayed late after flights to help the tech crews. But now, when she walked into the ready room, the room didn't miss a beat. It fell in behind her, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. On a day when it mattered, she had done what no one else could. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. Whispers began in other bases, and soon, a memo marked, "Confidential," began circulating in command channels. The footage from the drone was analyzed and studied, broken down frame by frame. Training manuals were updated, and a new maneuver was added to the curriculum, unofficially named the Brooks role. Ava never called it that. She didn't call it anything. To her, it was just doing what needed to be done. No recognition. No ceremony. Just the mission. Her locker remained unchanged, but there was a small addition. A photo slipped under the inner lip of the door. It was old, faded by time, a snapshot of her father standing in front of an F4 Phantom, the sun in his eyes, a half-smile on his face. No caption. No date. Just memory. One morning, a letter arrived. No envelope. Just a folded page slipped under her door. Handwritten, careful, but unsigned. The message was clear. We were wrong. You didn't fly like one of the best. You flew like the only one who could. Ava never spoke of it. She didn't need to. She pinned it behind the photo and, each time she stepped onto the tarmac, she carried no anger, no debt, no weight. Just precision. Just purpose. Because when the moment came, she didn't rise to meet it. She let it. They laughed when she walked into that hangar. They doubted her, dismissed her, turned their backs. But now, no one on that base could ever forget what they had seen. Because when everything failed, the radios, the formation, the mission, when lives hung by a thread, Ava didn't just rise to the occasion. She became the reason they made it home. And that was enough. Thank you for sticking with us through this wild ride. If this story hit you deep, don't forget to subscribe, ring that bell, and stay with us for more. Let's keep honoring the silent sacrifices that make us stronger. Catch you in the next one.